are offering weekly webinars during this month of October, celebrating National Cybersecurity Awareness Month to help our clients successfully navigate this time through conversations aimed at protecting their sensitive information and their customers' information and maintaining a secure remote connection. Today's conversation is developed by Absolute. We would like to take a moment to tell you more about the organizers of this webinar. Absolute is a Canadian organization specialized in security with more than 25 years in the market. It has a unique technological patent and global agreements with more than 28 manufacturers. Among them, the most important ones in the industry, like Lenovo, Dell, and HP. This agreement allows for their technology to come from the factory in the devices that are manufactured. The key to the patent is the integration of hardware and software known as persistence. GM SecTech is a company with more than 50 years in the computer security industry. We create innovative solutions that help accelerate business progress in the areas of services, business continuity, integrated security, physical and technological, cybersecurity, as well as process automation and orchestration. Their principles of simplicity, innovation, and customer success have made us one of the leading and fastest growing security and technology providers in the world. Today, we will discuss governance, risk, and compliance at the endpoint and endpoint data discovery. Some general rules regarding the engagement webinar today. There will be a 45 to 50-minute presentation, and at the end, we will have a 10-minute question and answer session through chat messages. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, we invite you to write them down in the chat so that we can answer them at the end. We will have the lines on mute during the presentation. And by the way, if you're interested in receiving an attendance certification for CPE credits, please let us know using the chat. We will gladly send you a certificate after the webinar. Also, we will be having a contest at the end of the webinar where we'll be giving away 3 prizes to the first, second, and third place contest winners. Winners will take home a 125 Amazon gift certificate. Second place will be a 75 Amazon gift certificate. And third place will be a $50 Amazon gift certificate. You must stay until the end and answer the questions using the Kahoot app, which we will put instructions in the chat window for everybody to be able to participate at the end. Without further ado, let me introduce you to Mr. Neil Avellino from Absolute. Neil?
Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. Yeah, my name is Neil Avellino, and I'm with Absolute Software. Today is going to be presenting you this topic about governance and risk and compliance from the endpoint scope. This is our agenda for today. We're going to have an introduction about regulations and the different challenges, and what are the different strategies we can follow to cover all this. When we talk about compliance and control, we definitely need to address these 3 aspects: security, privacy, and the internal policies of the organization. All this about security and compliance is based on controls. There are standards very defined and very documented and being adopted across the industry. PCI for the financial sector, the ISO 27001 that cover the entire enterprise and is easy to apply to different verticals. CIS controls are the base standard for vulnerability assessment, and these cover all the different verticals. NIST is government and military regulation that also is becoming a standard for the industry for those controls and others. Um, and we can see how the different segments and adoptions for these regulations are. What happened traditionally with these regulations always has been adopted and in place and control for the perimeter, for the data center, for the servers and applications that run our mission critical solutions inside the perimeter of the organization. As we know, the world is changing. The digital disruption is allowing organizations to consume and use services in the cloud, virtualize their data centers, consolidate solutions in the cloud with virtual networks or virtual clouds or public clouds, and use different uh, the ability to consume and have access to the solution from different places. This has changed the scope of the architecture of the organizations, where that perimeter is disappearing, and the endpoint devices, those those devices the customer uses, the different users utilize to connect, are now the tangible IT assets. With the data center migrating, with the solutions getting virtualized and on the cloud, with the access to solutions in multiple places, now these devices are the main point of attack. Is where the data resides, is where the users have access, is the new and more prevalent IT assets, and the IT assets are being changing. And this is impacting the entire business all across the organization. Now, users have access to the applications and the data through their corporate devices or their own devices. And it's now the need to adopt these controls and these regulations and these frameworks and apply to the endpoints. And this is a big challenge. It's a big challenge because in the data center we have a specific number of devices. I clearly know all those devices. We know where they are, how being used, how being configured. We have restricted procedures and control how those devices are being updated or modified and controlled. But that's not exactly the case with the endpoints. In the endpoints, we create policies, we define configurations, we define uh, goal images to provision those devices, configure policies. But every day, those devices have been modified. As we know, uh, uh, there are different metrics. Like in a year, an end user is able to install or deploy more than 20 applications, and that happens every year. So we need to control all that. So what is the big challenge with these controls? Well, the definition and the logic and the specification of those controls is daunting. Uh, every regulation specify a set of controls. There are in the hundreds of thousands of controls, and those controls require to collect the data, have access to the data, collect the data, validate, compare, and validate that data against the control, and then have that assessment. And once we have that assessment, then is the vulnerability assessment. What that means if the control is not applied, how we are vulnerable, and then the remediation. If we need to change that or remediate that, how we do it, and that that is daunting. And the big challenge in all organization is we don't have the data. The framework is very well documented. We maybe have the tools to access and collect that information, but the most important is we need the information. We need to have access to the data. And that's the value that Absolute brings to this topic. Absolute has the ability to collect all that data and have access to that data permanently. Why? Because the agent is persistent. The Absolute agent, the Absolute technology, is impossible to remove from the device. So we have a permanent connection to the machine, to every device, everywhere, in every network on the internet. Doesn't matter where the device is located, we have a direct connection and we have the ability to collect that data. So here on this screen, I have an example of two frameworks, PCI and NIST. And this link that is in the presentation, and we're going to be able to share with you the presentation later. You can get access to that documentation and have access to this documentation. This documentation is all this different data we need to collect to validate the controls. Actually, map multiple controls. For example, on this on this control, on this metric, we are saying the metric is saying that we need to collect the inventory of data and personnel of devices of everybody in the organization. So we need to collect that inventory. So the same requirement apply to all this control in all these metrics. So it's not only PCI, it's CIS, COVID, ISO, NIST. All these regulations have the same control, have the same metric, require the same data. So what I'm trying to explain is we can see all these metrics, all this regulation from the other way. If we have the data, and that's the case with Absolute, we collect more than 700 metrics. Now we can use all that data to validate multiple controls, multiple regulations. We have the data. That's the most valuable point. And with that data, using these mappings, we can then cover and apply to different controls and different regulations. What I'm trying to explain is there are many tools, many solutions that help you to audit and analyze those controls. Unfortunately, the majority of those solutions only apply to the data center, to the perimeter, to your network. They will scan the network to validate those controls or those vulnerabilities. They will scan your servers or your data center for those vulnerabilities. But when we talk about endpoints, it's very hard to use the same solution to audit 10,000s or 10 of thousands of devices across infinite number of networks. And now with COVID and the quarantines and where we are now, well, the end users are everywhere. They are at home and hotels all around the world. So it's very hard to collect that data. And that's the value of Absolute. Absolute will work anywhere, in any network, in any place. Now, collecting the data will take us to the next problem. And the next problem is privacy. When we talk about compliance and regulation, we are collecting a lot of data that could be sensitive data. And we can enter into regulation if we will be able to get access to that data or not. So and these go to privacy, and these are the in red are the different areas or countries where are starting a very new set of law regulations preventing the collection or use of those data. It's growing in Europe, it's growing in Latin America. There are different regulations and different entities. Very common in Latin America now. The enforcement of regulations like GDPR, or in Brazil with LGPD. In the Caribbean, the Dominican Republic has a new laws of private data collection. Across all the enterprise, There are new regulations like ISO that to prevent those data. In Mexico, is another uh, new set of laws that require the protection of those personal data. And and here's when we start having different challenges. So most of the information we can collect maybe could be getting into the border of these regulatory measures. Uh, we can define as personal information anything that can be linked to identify the end user. So in the solutions or in the way we collect the information, we need to have the ability to anonymize that data, ability to hide or mask or simply do not aggregate, for example, the user information, IP addresses, etc. So we need to have the ability to find out what is that personal data and has the ability to control. As I explained, the mapping we have with the different controls, the same happened with the privacy. For different regulations like GDPR for Europe or the ISO 27000 overlaps those controls. And then we can use the same policies or the same uh, measure across multiple regulations. So if we work with only one, so we have the data, we can validate and control the access of the level of propagation of that information. But now that we are collecting that data, we can use the same data lake or the same database to cover and support multiple regulations at once. So it's the benefit to have access to the information. So what been happening across all this time is many companies are getting in trouble of not protecting that data correctly. There was a very big case in healthcare where the fines were very steep because there were these failures to control this and protect that data. Uh, so now let's talk about the challenges. Let's say the organization requires to comply with PCI or requires to comply with ISOs or GDPR. And one of the main challenges in all this is the human error. We need to make sure the controls are being taken taking care, the processes are being followed, the users they need to have an ability to measure and know what is been happening on those devices. And something that happened with the endpoints across all organizations is something called shadow IT. The problem with the shadow IT is the end users are every day more empowered to have access to their own solutions, to their own systems, to their own applications. Uh, in the past, only IT was able to provide those systems or those applications. Right now, any user with their device can go to any provider on the cloud and have access to new data, new systems, new solutions to address their needs. And that creates for the business the problem of multiple shadow IT departments, multiple solutions that at the end IT need to support and cover. And that goes not only for enterprise but also in the education market. Well, it doesn't matter how much you protect the network. Students always have the ability to bypass the proxies, the VPNs, and have direct access to the internet. Why? Because they want to access games, they want to access YouTube, social network, But the same thing happened with our users. They want to access the social media. They want to access another solution. They want to access reports, connect to different system, bypass the security to install the applications they want. And with this case of working remotely, uh, we see what has been happening in the news, for example. Uh, Something very common that's been discovered with this uh, working from home is there has been some users that outsource their own job. Uh, they receive a device or they're connected to their own device, they're working remotely, and we find out that an employee outsourced their job to another person and they were sharing the salary. And that person was working in multiple companies, was employee in multiple companies, working remotely, and all the positions were outsourced. So with Absolute, we had the ability to find out where the machine is located, who's using it, where, and validate that the user is actually the employee that is supposed to be using the machine. So this is an example of, yes, we can define the controls. We have the try to apply a regulation, but we need to audit and validate the end users to make sure the uh, our measures are in place, our policies are being in place. Another challenge uh, has been now we have access to the data. Well, we need to control if the personal data is protected, and that's something that we can do. The other challenge is we need to know all our devices, and there's been different problems across the multiple organizations not to have the controls in place. Challenges not only with COVID, but also resource constraint, access to data, etc. So the addressable market for security has been growing. Across the year, more and more money has been assigned to security and to maintain those controls. But there is a reality. Doesn't matter how many controls we implement and deploy on devices, solutions, and components. Every every endpoint is a snowflake. Every endpoint may suffer changes across time and create a new reality that we in Absolute call or refer to like dark endpoint. We know based on our statistics of all devices and industry surveys that at any given time, 40% of the devices are out of network or out of control. That means the 40% of the devices we have at any given point is going to be out of the domain, out of the policies. We don't have control of that device. We don't know where that device is located, where it's used. For those machines that we deploy patches and have our in control, well, more than 20% of those devices, that process is going to fail. We're not going to be able to update those patches for many reasons. The control agent is uninstalled or is disconnected, the machine is out of the network, the device is out of the domain, the machine is a software level or OS version that doesn't receive any patches or more patches anymore. The device doesn't, the user no need to use VPN anymore. They have access to all the system through the cloud. If it doesn't connect to VPN, doesn't log in into the domain and receive the policies and update the machine. So this is a reality. Uh, and having 20% of the devices without patches means that you have 20% of devices vulnerable because is a wide open door for attacks. The same thing with the antivirus. Uh, doesn't matter what antivirus solutions or anti-malware solutions are you using. More than 20% of those machines are going to be obsolete. Why? Because again, it's software. We're trying to manage all these devices with software, and the software get uninstalled, disconnected, corrupted, and will fail. And the other alarming metric that we know for sure is encryption. Only half of the devices are getting encrypted. If the device is not encrypted, the data is exposed. If the machine is compromised, the machine is lost or stolen, anybody can have access to the data. But having access to the data, I mean, I need to have access to the machine, physical access to the machine. What is more alarming is if the device is not encrypted, if the hard drives or the volumes are not full encrypted, the device is vulnerable to ransomware. One of the main requirements to deploy a ransomware in a machine is the ability to change the partitions to install a rootkit that is the ransomware. The ransomware need to modify the partitions to install itself. If the device is encrypted, that's impossible. The ransomware have no ability to install on the machine, and the machine is immune. Is there is no way to compromise that machine with a ransomware, uh, and that's the big challenge. So a very simple step: you encrypt your machine, is ransomware free, and that's one of the challenges right now, having the organizations to enable and encrypt their device. Encryption has evolved across the years. It used to be software to do the encryption. Maybe a long time ago affect the performance. For the last 3 years, manufacturers has been working with Microsoft and other encryption vendors, and most of the encryption today is done by hardware. So if you encrypt the machine, let's say with BitLocker that is included for free in Windows, that encryption is hardware enabled. So it's zero impact in performance in the device. So now let's talk about a journey to apply a strategy to be in compliance. So now we know we want to be in compliance. There are some frameworks that define regulations and controls. We know we have the data, and with Absolute, we can have the data to track and measure every endpoint and every device. So how can we implement this? So the first step on the strategy is we need to pinpoint every device. Literally know exactly where every device is located. And this is something we can know with Absolute. We can know the geolocation of every device, every machine at any moment. We can have that audit. We can have that history. We can have that data uh, preserved and partitioned. We have the ability to uh, enable this information only when a security incident is happened. Let's say we have a group of people in the organization that, depending on the policies or the administrative settings, maybe seems sensitive to track their location. So we can have that turned off. When there is a security incident, then we can turn it on, and from that moment track and know and validate exactly where are those devices. So this is something can be managed based on policies. Not only to know where every device is and answer all the question of what configuration, who is using it, how being used, is to identify and authorize the use of personal information data. We need to have the ability to collect and to know all the personal data and what's happening with that data. Is that data compromised because it's been added to a locker of the internet? And this is part of the shadow IT problem. Maybe the OneDrive is the only one that's being configured as the corporate authorized cloud storage locker for the company or Google Drive. But we know multiple users like to use different things like iCloud or Dropbox or any other. And once the data is copied on those, it's gone. It's on the internet, it's copied in multiple machines. Many DLP solutions fail to track and collect that data. So that's something we need to know if those personal information has been compromised, and then have the ability to control and track that and apply the different measures. This is something now that we know the device and know the data, then we need to have strategies and procedures to protect that information. Not only we enable encryption, but also keeping track of the keys, or in case of that information is compromised, the ability to delete remotely the device with a military deletion or a crypto wipe, have the ability to block, freeze, or destroy that information if it's been compromised. So we need to have the ability and measures to control that information. Uh, we need to know what's happening on the machine. The monitoring has to be constant. We need to know if new software have been installed, if the necessary tools that need to be in the machine are always there. We need to have the ability to automatically maintain the mission critical applications. For example, the VPN client, the antivirus, the controls, the mission critical controls or policies like the domain connection. That's something that we need the solution to apply a policy called application persistent and make sure that those elements are always there and always running. We need to have the ability to assess those controls over and over and over again anytime. For example, if we define a framework that says we want to use or we need to use NIST or GDPR or different ISOs, PCI, well, we need to have the ability to audit the PCI controls anytime, any moment, for any group of users at the lower cost possible. And that's something we can use Absolute for. We can run a script, collect all those metrics, and validate and audit the controls. That way, we're going to know if we have a failure. We can assess that situation, determine if we have a failure, create the alerts, and then has the different groups or team people in the organization to apply the remediations, and then fix those failures, those problems with those regulations. Then, when you have the formal audit, let's say once a year or twice a year by the consultant firm, you can pass that audit with flying colors. But in order to do that, we need to have continual, constant assessment of those the situation of the endpoints, and that's and with all, and this is a comprehensive strategy to keep track and monitor those controls. We need to have complete access to all devices, have access to all the data. to ability to, with that data, validate any control that you need. I have the access to operations to control that. With Absolute, we have the ability to, once the solution is enabled, apply to all these different projects or IT strategies, not only to regulation, but also to adopt different modes of operation, like for example, zero trust, or reduce the surface attack for any vulnerabilities. Uh, Use the solution for the entire life cycle of the different endpoints. And for the endpoints, then we said the absolute is on the bottom of the technology pyramid. This is what we know. Absolute is in the hardware. It's omnipresent in 28 manufacturers. All the devices of all the manufacturers include Absolute because it's in the hardware. It's persistent. This makes the solution resilient. Doesn't matter what happened with the machine. Absolute is always going to be reactivated on the device. If the device is format, reimage, the OS is reinstalled, reset to factory values. If they change the hard drive, doesn't matter what happened in the machine. Absolute is will persist, have self-healing capabilities. It will reinstall and reactivate again on the device. With that, we know the device. We want to know for sure where that machine is located, how it's configured, etc. But what is really important for the organization is to manage that fleet of devices. We know that you need a stack of applications, between 9 and 12 applications that have to be there in order to secure those devices. This is an example of that list of devices that you need. You need an antivirus, you need a VPN, you need an orchestrator, you need an MDM. You're required to have a management tool. And those elements will fail. And will fail because it's just software. So something we can do with Absolute is create policies. And with those policies, monitor and guarantee that that application is always going to be there. If the antivirus is uninstalled, is attacked, is removed, they reinstall the OS. I never bother to reinstall the antivirus. Absolute is reinstalled automatically because it's in the hardware. One Absolute is reinstalled, you get the policy, and will reinstall this application and make sure that application is always running. If it is attacked, Absolute is going to repair and reinstall that application automatically. So that automation guarantees and enforces that your entire fleet is always going to be running, is always going to be configured properly, is going to have the control that are required, and the the audits are going to be in good shape. Not only because we're going to be assessing the security posture of the devices, but also we're going to be assessing those metrics that validate the different controls that we can enforce with the solution. So let's talk about two examples or two cases of to be audit ready. So for the endpoint resilience, this is the first part. Have a tool that we can rely on to collect the data. But we need to be able to gather that information. There's going to be some challenges, and there's going to be also some requirements that we need to go through that we need to make sure that we collect that data. And with Absolute, we can do all this, but just the tool is not enough. We require the consulting and the expertise that GM security bring to the table to maintain and ensure those controls are proper, those configurations are valid. The, for example, the PCI framework has been followed and all those controls are enabled. So the tool and the solution is important, but the process, the technology, and the people using the solution to enable that is even more important. That's why it's very valuable, this partnership we have uh, with GM Security to enable all this validation. So Absolute will operate and cover in these three areas. So from the asset point of view, we can guarantee the collection of all the data, basically because the persistent, the agent is impossible to remove. We're going to have the information all the time. And we're going to have the ability to enforce the policies and the ability to collect the data to be ready to, at any moment, at any time, run the reports and validate that PCI, GDPR, the CIS controls are in place, or the personal health information or the personal uh, information is secure or is at risk on those devices. The other things, another example is, okay, we run the audit, we determine there are problems, we found failures, we apply those corrections in the procedures and in the in the tools, but I have 20,000 devices. How I fix those 20,000 devices? So that's something we can do with Absolute as well. We can have the ability to remove that data that is at risk, identify those devices that need to be corrected. We have the ability to run scripts, deploy policies, and fix those vulnerabilities or those security postures that will put the solution at risk. So, final thoughts before we go to the different tests and to the trivia we have today. I think is the big challenge to deploy those controls and regulations and to be in compliance is not to adopt a framework. The framework is very well documented. There are different tools. There are people with the expertise to validate, analyze, and that's the value that GM bring to the table. In the endpoint, the big challenge is to have access to the data, monitor, track, and collect the data of every single device in the organization. And that's the value that Absolute help you to unlock. A persistent agent, an invisible tether to every machine that self-heal, auto-repair, is impossible to remove, that at any moment, at any time, we can collect the data and assess the security posture, the regulation, and the different controls we want to have on that machine. If there are failures, then the same invisible tether is going to allow us to fix or correct the problem in any machine and any time. With that, I end my presentation. Horencio, Alex?
Thank you, Neil. Thank you very much. A very great presentation, very informative. We have about 10 minutes left in the hour, and we want to respect your time, everyone's time. And if you have any questions regarding the presentation and regarding Absolute's persistence technology, please put them in the chat and we'll be glad to answer them and set up a one-to-one with Neil if that's appropriate at the time. So with that, I'd like to talk about the contest. So We have a contest for everyone to participate with great prizes. Uh, all you need to be able to do is enter in your browser kahoot.it. And what we'll do is be dropping that in the chat so that everybody can go to that screen, and we'll be publishing in a moment a PIN number so that everyone can participate. With the PIN, you're going to basically navigate to that browser and enter in the digits that we're going to provide for the PIN. And we're going to be having our contest. And again, to kind of go over those prizes, which were fantastic prizes, we're going to have three of them. The first place prize, the big winner, will take home a $125 Amazon gift certificate. The second prize will be a $75 gift certificate from Amazon. And the third place winner will get a $50 gift certificate. So stand by, go ahead and navigate to www.kahoot.it. And that'll give you the page that'll be asking for the game pin, which we will publish in the chat within moments. Stand by. We're almost there. And again, if anyone has any questions for Neil regarding Absolute and their GRC endpoint discovery and persistence technology, now would be the time to ask that. The pin has just been published in the chat. So if you go to the pin and put in 4686971, you will be put into the game of for the prizes of the Amazon gift certificate. Also, I want to reiterate, if anyone needs to receive CPE credits for attending this webinar today, please let us know in the chat so that we can go ahead and make sure that we deliver that certificate to whoever needs CPE points. All right, we got an update here in the window. We got the Kahoot game contest will be beginning in about 1 minute. So now's the time to hurry up and get to kahoot.it and enter in the game pin. All right, it is begun. All right, so this contest is going along quite quickly, and it seems like some of you did pay quite a bit of good attention. Carlos was on fire, but now Liz, 1056, is pulling ahead here in the last stages of our contest. Question 8. Can we use absolute in any endpoint? Can we use absolute in any endpoint? Let's see how these answers come in. See if the leaders can stay ahead or drop behind. Well, looks like Liz is still on top. 9 questions out of 10. Ninth one. What are the challenges facing IT security? That's a good one. See how our contestants answer this particular question. So we enter the last stages of our contest. All of the above. That is correct. So Liz stays at the top of the leaderboard. And MCM moves up into second place. So number 10, can Absolute help you with compliance reporting and audits? Can they help you with compliance reporting and audits? Well, there you go. That is a great contest. Carlos in third, MCM in second, and Liz 5617 in first. Great contest winners. Please drop your contact information, your email address and names into the chat so that we can get you those prizes directly. Again, Liz 1056 is in first place. MCM is second place, and Carlos is third place. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And again, please, winners, drop your names and your emails into the chat so that we can get you your prizes as quickly as possible. And to everybody else, thank you very much for joining us today for our webinar, GRC at the endpoint and endpoint data discovery. Everyone have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. Take care.